So for these sessions, for me, it will be a poetry session. Because when I first met the speaker, I was really young. It was during my first year in INSEP. I had chronic pain on my shoulder and my arm. And she opened a window of poetry, of imagination, of visualization. So for me, it will be a poetry session. So please welcome to Claire Calmels. She's researcher in sports performance neuroscience at INSEP. Please, under your applause.
Hello, everybody. I would like to extend my warm welcome to everybody here. I'm also very delighted to be talking to you. And today, my talk will be entitled An Evolution in Support Tools for Sport Performer. In the last year, it's not uncommon to see the appearance of new technology on sport area. Just to name a few, on the top of the screen, LZR racer suits worn by Sullivan and Phelps on 2008 Olympic Games. This suit has a property to decrease friction and drag in the water and increase efficiency of arm and leg movement of the swimmer. At this time, a lot of world records were broken. Now, this suit is not used anymore. Second, there are a lot of professional athletes agree to weigh themselves by a dozen of grams by wearing sensors, as you can see on the top of the slide. Sensors that are collecting physical parameters, for instance, the speed, the acceleration, deceleration of the athletes, or some physiological parameters such as heart and breath rate. And this is a parameter were sent to a kind of application to help the coach to give some important feedback and to work on the weaknesses of athletes and also to prepare the forthcoming event. On the Olympic of Rio, you can see running blades with a C form, and this is a very important new technology because when the foot of the athlete hits the ground, blades were compressed and store energy. When the foot of the athlete leaves the ground, the stored energy is released. So it was incredible and performance were great. It's not unusual as well to see drones during training session. They were filmed training session and every parameter that were collected were sent to the coach to try to to work with athletes about their weakness. And finally, the data at the heart of NBA. Every basketball at NBA is filmed, and elements such as distance covered by basketball players, the number of decisive passes performed, and shooting angle are analyses, and it helps to prepare forthcoming meeting events. Now I'm going to stop about this new technology because, to be honest with you, it's not really my topic. And my topic is something about neuroscience. I'm working on trying to investigate how brain function and about cortical plasticity. And in this talk, I'm going to explain to you all the support tools I have put in place for athletes at the INSEP to help them increase their performance. So, first thing, I took into account 15 years ago the knowledge of neuroscience and more specifically cortical plasticity. If you have one thing to retain, it's the following: the importance on sensory input or peripheral sensation on cortical reorganization. Just a memo, what is peripheral sensation? Peripheral sensation, there are two kinds of peripheral sensation I took into account. Proprioception. Proprioception is the athlete's ability to know exactly the position of their body in space and the position of each limb in comparison to other limb, whether they be upper or lower limb. The other peripheral sensation to take into account is a sense of touch or haptic sensation. Haptic sensation were often generated by the hand of an individual who is going to manipulate a kind of object in his hand and is studying, collecting the form of the object, its temperature, its consistency, etc. So this is peripheral sensation. Are important. Brain is a very important system and is a set of a lot of things: thought, reasoning, integration of sensory perception, memory, learning, genesis of emotion, and the control of conscious or unconscious, and the control, conscious or unconscious, of some behavior. And brain is very well organized because brain is able to reorganize the neural network on two different ways. First, brain is able to create new network, new neuronal paths after a learning process. Just have a look. Oh, sorry. Well, okay, it's not really working. So if you look on the figure on this slide, you can see before learning, after learning. Before learning, you can see in a very simple way 2 neurons in connection, and they're linked by a neural path. When the individual is submitted to a learning process, his constraints are a new thing he has to integrate, and during learning and after learning, you see in red the creation of new neuronal pathway. Okay, so the new network. First reorganization. There's a second reorganization which is a little bit debilitative. It means that if an individual experiences a situation of sensorial deprivation, it's not very good because the brain is able to undo neuronal network or to undo neuronal paths. It means if I took the figure in the other way, okay, 2 neurons, 2 neural pathway, and if an individual do not feel, do not able to sense peripheral sensation, what happens? The brain is able to break, to make disappear the connection. And this is easier to be sure that everybody understands. It's like mushroom picking episode. I don't know if there are some people who are fond of going to pick up some mushroom. Personally, I like. During the mushroom season, people go to the forest to look for mushrooms, okay? There are places where mushrooms are very prolific. They are well marked, there are trails that are well marked because many people go to pick up this mushroom. When it's not the season of mushroom, the nature takes back its right and the paths disappear because nobody uses them. And it's exactly the way the brain works. So I go a step further and I'm going to explain to you that there's Boschbach, a female researcher, who discovered, who investigated the importance of this peripheral sensation to access to the motor representation with this code somewhere in the brain and to update this motor representation. If the subject leave deprivation, sensory motor deprivation, no more energy. The subject, individual, is unable to access to the motor representation coded in the brain. And so if he cannot access, he cannot update it. And if the motor deprivation lasts a long time, the motor representation is going to fade. And at least if time is very long, the motor representation disappears. So, when an athlete is injured, the athlete lives an episode of deprivation. Luckily, it's a transitory episode of deprivation. And how do I know that the motor representation is altered? Because they report, I can't picture myself in the movement anymore. It's gone blurry. When I do the movement in my mind, guess what? I can't tell what I should feel, and most importantly, at which moment I can feel it. This means that the motor representation is fading, is altering. Now, in sport where there are some uncertainties, and more specifically on table tennis and badminton, sport with no contact, dwelling racket sport, injured athletes report, when I observe my training partner or my opponent, I cannot longer guess what they are about to do. It means that the motor representation is degraded, altered. This was about brain functioning and cortical plasticity. Now, motor simulation. Based on Jean Rod theory, motor simulation may occur in three forms. You are not going to discover new things because I'm sure everybody here have heard about the motor simulation that may occur in three forms. On the first slide on the top, on the left side, what are we going to see? There an athlete who is going to form a mental image of a routine in her head. That's called image action, or in neuroscience, motor imagery. Secondly, you see the same athlete verbalizing the main element of the routine, either silently or aloud. That's called verbalized action. And when the action is observed after having performed her routine, the athlete go in front of a video and observe her performance. That's observed action. And very briefly, this classification was based on Jean Rod theory. And I think it's important to understand the following and to understand the situation I put in place with athletes. The basis of his theory is common cortical motor systems are activated when an individual image observed or execute for real an action. Two parts composed an intended action that is executed. It means a real action you can see. There's two stages, a covert stage, you cannot observe, you cannot see, and on the opposite, an overt stage, you can see. Covert stage is important, and it's the representation of the future. It means the goal of the action, for instance, grasping this object. The means to do this action, how is the grasping task. And after, the consequence on this action, on the body of the individual and on the external environment. Jean Rod also said that different kinds of action, voluntary action or willed action, you can see, and image or observed action that you cannot see because they are covert actions. He also said that actions can be placed on a continuum which go from intention to motor execution. So, to conclude, covert action are in fact action, except for the fact they are not executed. Indeed, there's a kind of motor inhibitory system which does not allow the motor program and the action to be initiated. Very important, because for the exercise, I will remind you this. Simulation and action involve a representation of the action at the current state, at the T moment, and as well a representation of its subsequent state. This is important. The Janro's theory has been validated by fMRI studies. fMRI studies have probed that there's the existence of functional equivalence of image, observation, and executed action. And their common actions, it means that common areas are activated when a subject, an individual, image or observe an action, and as well when he executes this action for real. These common areas are prefrontal cortex, premotor cortex, SMA, and inferior and parietal superior cortex. Just for you to understand, the premotor cortex received information for prefrontal cortex, information related to the motivation and the intention of the subject. Okay, they go within premotor cortex. Premotor cortex receive as well some information coming from inferior and parietal, inferior and superior parietal cortex, and this is information as sensory motor information, and they are going to premotor cortex. And these two kinds of information allow premotor cortex to choose the appropriate movement of the motor sequence regarding the context at hand. Okay, so this is important. A little bit later, there are some studies which, as well, have found a functional equivalence of verbalized action and executed action. It means that when a subject performs the action you see on the top level, and when she's reciting or verbalizing the moment important of the action, there are common area and motor area which are activated, motor cortex and primary motor cortex, which both are recognized to be involved in programming actions. Now, about the knowledge of neuroscience, it means the importance of peripheral sensation and the functional connectivity. I'm sure that you have a question in your head, and the question is it possible, I cannot read, is it possible to generate sensation without concomitantly performing actual movement? And if so, can motor simulation allow this? Some kind of answer. First, when you are doing imagery, sometimes individual can feel kinesthetic sensation. And in the theory of Janrod, it says kinesthetic sensation when imagining can be the result of expected sensory consequences. Important. The second is that when you are observing your own routine, it has been shown by an Autrichian research team, Kaiser and Gaizola, that in the brain of the individual, motor and somatosensory motor cortex are activated. It means that the individual, it's important, simulate motor output and as well somatosensorial input. And to be sure to have some sensation, there's a French team from Lyon who had shown that, for instance, in, how do you call spring? Okay, athletes who are doing this, okay. When they are imaging the movement and when they are mimicking it, it has been proven that the movement, the performed from real, is efficient and more technical in comparison to people who didn't mimic the move during imagining blah, blah, it, okay? And miming, for instance, we are going to show an athlete just before doing her performance. Look, she's mimicking her performance with the upper part of the body. Okay? And after making the performance she planned to do, she's going to dive in the swimming pool and to do the performance. So, to summarize, since many cortical areas are activated both during motor simulation and execution of movement, and since motor simulation can produce peripheral sensation needed to drive brain plasticity, you remember with no sensation, you cannot access a motor representation, and the representation is not okay, not good. It could be thus postulated that practicing motor simulation constitutes training for actual execution of a movement. And even more, motor simulation could be a means to counteract negative effects of transient sensory motor deprivation. And since 7 or 8 years, there's a program who help to athletes to recover more quickly. And we have got very nice, very encouraging result. And it works. Why? Because of all the things I explained to you before. And there are some conditions. The athlete, the injured athlete, should adhere to the program. If he does not adhere, I am losing my time, the athlete is losing your time, and it's going to be crapped, okay? So, the program should be elaborated, constructed in a tight collaboration with the athlete and the person in charge of motor simulation. So the program is personalized. Technique could be used alone or in combination. And there's really a team work with athlete coaches, physiotherapists, doctors, surgeons, and psychologists. Just an example of an athlete which is injured. So I need silence because we cannot hear. What is she going to do? You see that is
passe-fil, pied-main, sur les deux
she's verbalizing the routine. And after, with eye closed, she verbalizes the routine and she minds the routine on asymmetrical bars. So it means with this athlete, we have constructed a program with 3: verbalization, eye closed, imagery, and mimicking. Another athlete, which is not injured and won a medal at the European Championship in gymnastics on the beam apparatus. And here, just before her routine, performing the routine, look, mimicking, imaging. Look, and here, activation, just before going. So it means that motor simulation could use for different purpose. Develop technical and tactical skill at the beginning or end of a learning process. Eradicate a defect in a movement that limits the progression of athletes. To get rid of loss of figure while performing an acrobatic move. Everybody, I think, here remembers that Simone Biles suffered from this kind of pathology, and she had to quit the competition because she completely lost the landmark in the space. She doesn't know where exactly the body is in the space, and it could be very dangerous for her security. Put an end to a refusal to initiate a movement, for instance, at pole vault. Sometimes the athletes, they run, and they refuse jumping. Reduce training loads. If an athlete is a little tired physically or mentally, or if he suffers from pain, we can stop training and compensate the lack of training by motor simulation. Now, this is very nice, this one, because this one is an example of motor simulation, but in sport, when there are a lot of uncertainty. She's injured on the legs, and she's a young female basketball player. So basketball is a sport where there are a lot of uncertainty, And I said to myself, oh my God, it was one of my first athletes who gets injured, and I said, how I'm going to do, because there's a lot of uncertainty. And basketball player, we discuss a lot with them, and they explained to me that there's some tactical schema. And he gave me some paper with a schema, and you're going to see that this athlete is going to do model simulation on a particular schema, tactical schema. She ran, she saw all the opponent, all her partner. Là, she's posing, I think, a kind of spin. Run, call for the ball. Okay. So she do with closing eyes, motor simulation, mimicking. And this example is going to help me to treat the second part of my talk, which is the Arpit project in badminton. Badminton, oh my God, I took some notes because I do not want to say some mistakes. In badminton, players evolve in an uncertain and changing environment in which they must act, adapt, and make decisions quickly. So they have to act quickly and well, most of the time being tired, physically or mentally. There's some uncertainty in badminton. The where, the when, and the what. Where? Where will the action take place? On which part of the ground? When? When the action take place? Exactly at which moment? And what kind of action will take place? So, with all these nice people, and I would like to thank them very much, Johan Morillo, Sébastien Mida, the national badminton coach, Maxime Michel, Baptiste Carême, Thibaut Pillier, and myself, we decided to create. It makes 4 or 5 years I thought about this idea, but I did not find the time, the right person to work with, and finally it arrived. And we devise an interactive application to improve information and decision making in badminton players. Why we do this? Because this project is twofold. We really want to try to make disappear the gap between the level of Asian badminton player who are the best of the world and the French badminton players. Because you have to know that Asian players, they started badminton at the year of 2 or 3 years of age, I think. And, okay, very important load of training. And unfortunately, if Asian badminton player get injured, sorry for what I'm going to say. It doesn't matter because there are 100 other badminton players from Asia who are just waiting this opportunity to be able to enter the national team. So to try to unravel this gap, we create this interactive application, and we try to do it in a very ecological way to be able to see the transfer on the real practice of badminton. And because I am a researcher, the second goal is I would like to publish an article because it's normal. So it's very nice because it helps the coach and the athletes, and it helps me to publish. To publish about what? To publish about cortical plasticity following perceptivo-cognitive programs put in place. Okay, I think I do not forget anything. And to do this kind of interactive application, we use a temporal occlusion paradigm. I know everybody knows, but I just refresh your mind. It means that if X observe a computer screen of a badminton match, and at a particular moment, T moment, the video clip is paused, and X must predict where the shuttlecock, yes, shuttlecock will fall in the court in order to counter the action of the observed player. It means the opponent. An answer is provided with a tactile touch on the screen. For instance, the Arpit interaction proposed, for instance, example, two propositions, two solutions. You see, on the third column, the players made a choice, and sorry for him, it fails. So correction, and the answer was the green. Okay, so it's a feedback that is provided after each trial, or not after each trial, every other trial, or after 10 trials, not to be dependent of the feedback, because it inflated the artificial performance. Some information about the creation of this interactive application. Match were selected from the 20 biggest tournaments in the world. So it means that very, very good players played, and players belong to the top 30 players of the list. So for the, today, 18 badminton matches that were analyzed, and from this analysis, there were 15,000 tags and 50,000 attributes. And this is this person, Johan, Sébastien, Paul Alexandre, and Hervé. I would like to thank very much, because they do it completely manually to be able, at the first time, to feed the application. And this application, it will be possible to complexify the situation. For instance, variation in decision support, two propositions. For instance, the interaction on the first line, two solutions, and the player has to choose between the two solutions. He chooses, and unfortunately, he's wrong. Or the application Arpit does not propose any solution, and the players has to find the solution. So, unfortunately, he failed. So he has got the correction. And it can be tricky, because we can add a lot of different zones, and it's the same principle. Oops. To complexify, I give you some kind of path, but there are a lot of others, which can be more difficult is the moment of occlusion. Does the occlusion happen before, during, or after the contact between the racket and the shuttlecock? Reduction of the response times at the beginning to help him to collect the good information. He's got the time he wants to answer, and after we reduce the response time to make it more difficult, and to make the athlete be able to transfer it to the real practice. Intention of the opponent. We are distinguished three kinds of intention: strong intention, under constriction, and weak intention. The length of the exchange, for instance, I hope I didn't say mistakes. Short exchange, 5 stroke. Middle between 5 and 15, and long exchange more than 15. And as well, manual laterality of the opponent. And just to illustrate that, this is the application. There are different, different panel. For instance, general. We are going to study the opponent is Antonsen. Antonsen? Yes, Antonsen, okay. There's on this match, there's available question, there 171 situation. The type of response is numeric. It means it's done in front of a computer, because there also is the other possibility to do it for real in front of a big screen on the ground. Badminton. Nombre de questions, question number 20. Do we present this situation in an aléatoire manner or in a chronological way? There are both advantage and disadvantage of these two solutions, but I think that if we propose to the athlete the most possible choice, the brain of the athlete is going to become very flexible, and it will be very easily to adapt on a real situation. attribute d'évaluation, ça, it means it's the stroke which is going to be worked. If you tell me what it is, I have no idea, because the people who have worked with me are specialists and experts in badminton, and unfortunately, I am not, but I trust them. Format A, I can also add some anxiogene situation to see how they react when they are anxious, or I can make them tired, cognitively or physically, and after they are going to play on the application. And we can make some variation sonore and the environment, is the environment favorable or disfavorable to the player. Format, okay. Peripheral, it means the number of exchange of stroke that happen after, when the video stopped. So, and when does it stop? It stopped before the contact of shuttlecock with the racket, champ visuel, blablabla. Bla, bla, forme de réponse, et les règles du feedback. Donc, just an example of the application. Okay, it stopped, and there are 3 possibilities, and the athlete who trained on the Arpit, they had to choose where the shuttlecock is going to fall on the ground, and when he found, he clicked on the answer. It means the shuttlecock goes here, and okay. It's okay, and after this exercise, there's some statistics which are computed. For instance, the result, 14 out of 20, so it's quite okay for a beginning. The time it took to make all the response, all the answer, it's 627 milliseconds. And after we distinguish good answer from bad answer, and we've got the reaction time. And because as well I am a researcher, is the second ball, I would like to make a publication. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to study the effect of cortical plasticity following and during the Arpit training program. I'm going to do a pretest. The pretest is just to see, will help to be compared with the post-test, the retention test, and the tests which are done during the perceptivo-cognitive treatment. So, a test on a computer with the application, a test on the field testing, and during this I'm also collecting EEG data, plastical to see how brain evolve during Arpit training session, after, and in the retention test. To be sure the retention test is done, to be sure that it's that when we stop the training of Arpit, there are some things which stay, there's something which stay in the brain of the athlete who trained with this application. So 6 months of Arpit training. Normally it's supposed to become at the end of January and finished more or less June, July. During this time, there are physical training on the badminton ground. There are some competition, and among these 6 months, we're going to make 2 tests to see how it evolves. Because if we do only a pre-test and a post-test, it's not enough accurate. We want to see, I want to see how the brain evolves over time, step by step. And oui. Oops. Thank you for your attention, and I would like to say thank you to the athlete I work with, and more specifically, the athlete I begin with. For instance, Celia, and there are some, my first athletes I'm working with when they get injured. I think I will remember all of my life, because at the beginning you say, oh Claire, it's very nice, but we know after we do not have any time. So what did they say? When the athlete has time, Dixit, the coach, they sent me, they are injured, so try to do your best. And because it's I carry on, and now I'm working, and thanks to this, there are some coaches who are self-confident with my work and will allow me, for instance, to use motor simulation, for instance, in badminton to improve performance of badminton player at INSEP. Thank you for everything.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Claire. It was perfect. You were under pressure, but it was perfect. Yeah. Is there any questions, maybe? Yes? C'est le bleu.
Okay. Thanks very much for your talk. Do you prefer the question in French or in English?
I don't mind.
Okay. Laure Fernandez, I'm a researcher in neuroscience in Marseille, so very interesting for your talk. I have two questions. First one, very quick question. I would like to know if you register the gaze behavior during the last experiment you present. And my second question is still about the last experiment. So you propose a judgment task and not a moving task, if I understand well. The player doesn't have to move, they just have to judge.
See, in a second time, the player is going to move. We are going, in the first time, to do on the computer.
Okay.
And after, we are going to do for real. And because the pretest is composed of a computer task and a real task, we're going to see, to measure indirectly if it's positively correlated.
Okay.
So it means if working on the computer, there's a transfer directly on the field. But in the second years, we plan as well to mix sessions on computer and session on in real on the ground.
Okay, great. So that's
and
my
for
question.
the gaze of the with what do you measure the gaze?
With an eye tracker.
You are going to ask me. I do not use eye tracking because there's no theoretical model behind that I'm satisfied with. And when I collect data where the athlete is looking okay, I have a localization, but it doesn't mean that the attention of the athlete is at the point that is measured. I can look this sign, but my attention is here and here. So that's why I do not work on gaze of...
Yeah, but this is right. I agree with you in a case of behind a computer, but in real life or during the play?
Yes, it's very difficult to do it in life, and we are still thinking about this. And we are decided to put a big camera, which is able to catch 120 frames per second, and so that we can have really good details, you know, because on a video the frame is only 25 or 24 frames per second. So we're just starting, and we hope to carry on because we've got very nice athletes who are very motivated and coach as well.
Great, thanks very much.
You're welcome.
I think there is one last question on the back.
Dr. Ruffo.
Salut.
Hello.
Thank you for your presentation. First comment on the eye tracking, but I think you know my point of view on this, but I mean, we measure different things, and if you want to know where the attention is, you can just ask the athlete where it is or where it was. But my question is not on this. But so you use motor imagery with your athletes by saying that the coupling between the movement and the content of the images needs to be connected somehow. But on the videos, we see that the athletes are sitting, so not really acting as they do in their practices. So, and because we know also that we can have mental images by having our eyes open, so do you think that there could be ways to combine those?
In the slide you saw the athlete was seated because she was injured on the legs. So I try to do the best. So I've got a special ball. You can, or I don't know, a little tabouret avec des petites roulettes. Qui nous permet d'utiliser ceci pour essayer de se rapprocher. Mais dès que l'athlète a récupéré, je la mets en position debout. Et pour qu'elle travaille sur les parties blessées, je me fais référence aussi à la thérapie du miroir qui marche hyper bien. Et que j'ai un peu perfectionné derrière. Donc si ça t'intéresse, je pourrais te dire ce que j'ai fait derrière.
Merci. Merci beaucoup, Claire.
Merci à vous.